Time is a funny thing. Recently we revisited Bioshock 2 for the channel, a game that I believe to be an underappreciated game in this series that on launch was disappointing for many. Yet over time I have felt the tide shifting in popular opinion, and more people at least will admit Bioshock 2 is a good game. Bioshock Infinite seems to be almost the opposite. Again, Bioshock Infinite has always been a game I held in high regard, and at launch many also had this opinion, and I'm sure many still do. They're just less vocal than those who have their problems with the game, whether it be with the game's story, the changes to gameplay, or the early game footage and teasers compared to the game we finally got. And that's really why I love to do videos like this. Going back to see if my opinions still stand the test of time, or maybe they don't. I mean, it has been 7 years since the game released and I last played it. So let's see how Bioshock Infinite holds up today. In this video, I'll be going over Bioshock Infinite's development, story, and gameplay, and seeing how the main game experience holds up today. I will be covering Burial at Sea in a separate video because this video is honestly long enough as it is with just the main game content, and Burial at Sea for just being DLC is honestly a lot to talk about. So if you want to hear my thoughts on that experience and know when that video releases, just subscribe, it's easy. As always, time codes are in the description below for your convenience. Bioshock Infinite's development returns to Irrational Games, beginning development shortly after the release of the original Bioshock back in 2007. The first 6 months of development was focused on prototyping several different ideas to determine the new game's setting, considering going back to Rapture believing that it is synonymous with the Bioshock name, but the devs found themselves bored with the idea after working on ideas for stories and quests, which meant the team needed a new setting for this game other than Rapture, which was a terrifying prospect for the team. They had considered a Renaissance setting until Assassin's Creed 2 was announced to be in the same setting and quickly dropped the idea, and it wasn't long after that they arrived at the idea of an air city. The idea of an air city really stood out to Irrational Games immediately, but originally they still felt themselves being stuck in the design of Rapture, and because of this, the game was noticeably darker and too claustrophobic for a city based in the skies. The idea of American exceptionalism didn't come until roughly 6 months before the game was revealed, and this idea and the setting of Columbia came after Levine and the team read Eric Larson's The Devil in the White City. This idea of American exceptionalism and having a city essentially like a traveling World's Fair really opened up the world's design and brightened the color palette, finally allowing Irrational Games to move away from the tried and true design of Rapture. The game's story went through many changes, now having a talking protagonist in Booker DeWitt instead of the previous Jack Ryan and Subject Sigma, who were silent, and this change was primarily because of the story's focus on Elizabeth. Booker needed his own identity and voice so that us the player would not only see Elizabeth as a useful AI companion, but someone we could build a bond with emotionally, and Levine decided to help the relationship of the two characters feel more natural, didn't disclose the full story to Troy Baker and Courtney Draper so they could help develop their characters and refine the story. The story between Booker and Elizabeth drew from many inspirations in everything from books, films, and other games, but two inspirations that stood out to me the most were Beauty and the Beast and Enslaved: Odyssey to the West, which after seeing these as inspirations, I can totally see it in the final product. But in terms of how Elizabeth would interact in this world, Irrational really looked to Alex Vance from Half-Life 2 for inspiration, as Levine described her as a central element and emotional driver for that game, and wanted Elizabeth to have a similar role in Infinite. Programming Elizabeth's AI proved Irrational Games' biggest technical challenge though, because they wanted to give her as much human behaviour as possible, and this proved to be such a great challenge. Irrational had contemplated removing Elizabeth from the game several times. But Levine countered this challenge by implementing a subgroup within the studio called the Liz Squad that would review all the level designs to help adjust and ensure she was accounted for within the landscape, instead of having her hide away until combat resolved. With the setting of Columbia being a city in the sky, as the early footage for the game shows, originally Bioshock Infinite was almost sandbox-like. The setting's inherent verticality, the combat segments were much longer with more AI-driven objectives like calling in zeppelins, and the game's tears were much grander, going so far as Elizabeth being able to import new weather to combo with the Vigors, Bioshock Infinite's version of plasmids. What we ended up with was far more linear however, and whilst I couldn't find a source as to why this change occurred, I can pin it down to two things. One would be the 7th generation consoles struggled with Infinite's ambition. There was no way this would have worked on such ancient hardware at the time. But two, like I mentioned, Elizabeth's AI had its struggles, and the level design needed to be tweaked to help the AI feel the way it was intended. Now look, Bioshock Infinite's development is incredibly in depth. You could honestly make a 20-minute long video on the subject, especially in regards to the differences between the game's reveals over time. Bioshock Infinite's final product cut and changed a lot of content, such as vigors, tears, weapons, locations, characters, and enemies. So much so that with all the cut content, they could have made 5 or 6 games. Clearly, Irrational Games' ambition was massive for Infinite, and the setting clearly prompted more and more ideas out of the team. And whilst the revealed footage for the game looks incredible, the final product we ended up getting was still widely praised after the game finally released after 5 years of development in March 2013. Bioshock Infinite was truly a tale of ambition versus reality. It just so happens that the reality was still incredible. Let me begin by saying this story explanation will involve a lot more play-by-play on my behalf, and I'll go over my thoughts about the story once it's all said and done, because the story here in Infinite is quite complicated in terms of retelling due to the game's ending, which needs to be properly explained and led up to as it deals with the many worlds theory. Bioshock Infinite takes place in 1912, where we take control of our protagonist Booker DeWitt as he is being taken to a lighthouse by Robert and Rosalind Lutus. As they leave Booker on the island with our only knowledge or objective being, bring us the girl and wipe away the debt. The lighthouse doubles as a rocket silo where we are strapped in and transported to the city in the sky, Columbia. It doesn't take long to realize how polar opposite Columbia is compared to Rapture, as we are baptized just so that we can enter the city. I mean, really it's drowned. The priest gets a little excited.
I don't know, brothers and sisters, but this one doesn't look clean to me.
Whilst unconscious, we get a flashback to a moment we will learn more and more about as the game progresses, but for right now we learn about Booker's gambling debts that resulted in him needing to go to Columbia. Once Booker regains consciousness, we explore Columbia unnoticed until we get to the infamous raffle scene, where we become identified by a policeman due to the brand on our hand, AD. A sign of the false shepherd. The man bearing this brand was prophesied to lead the lamb, aka Elizabeth, the girl we've come for, astray and lead to the downfall of the city by Columbia's leader and prophet, Father Comstock, leaving Booker, now a wanted man, needing to fight his way to Monument Island where Elizabeth is being held. Once we reach the island, we learn about Elizabeth's abilities of manipulating tears, rips in the space-time continuum that lead to parallel worlds. We manage to free Elizabeth as her warden, the Songbird, attempts to stop us by destroying the tower as Booker and Elizabeth narrowly escape. If you call plummeting to the unknown a successful escape. We manage to survive the fall as Elizabeth pulls us from the water as Booker repeats the name Anna. From here the pair head towards an airship as they plan to head to Paris, a city Elizabeth is obsessed with, always wanting to see it for herself. To get there though, we end up passing through the Hall of Heroes, where we learn more about both Booker and Elizabeth. Booker was involved in the Battle for Wounded Knee, a massacre on the Native Americans and a piece of the puzzle towards his gambling debt due to guilt. We also learned that Elizabeth is Elizabeth Comstock, daughter to the Prophet. Not a massive shock to us the player, but to Elizabeth fills her with rage. Once we reach the airship, Booker changes plans and heads for New York so he can deliver Elizabeth to Robert and Rosalind, which Elizabeth doesn't like as she knocks Booker out and flees. We awaken to find the airship is now under the control of Daisy Fitzroy, the leader of the Vox Populi. The Vox, as they are referred to, are a rebellion organization made up of the oppressed groups within Columbia, looking to take over. Fitzroy offers to give Booker the airship back if he supplies enough guns to arm the Vox before again, we take a pretty big fall that you wouldn't immediately just get up from. After some more chasing and convincing, we yet again join forces with Elizabeth to secure the weapons for the Vox from a local gunsmith. And this is where Elizabeth's ability to manipulate tears comes into full force, as to retrieve the guns, she needs to layer tears on top of tears, manipulating reality in the hopes of getting the guns to the Vox, as the gunsmith was found to be dead in our present reality. The compiled tears mess with our present reality though, disturbing Elizabeth due to the physiological and psychological consequences of the world, from characters or enemies who have died in our reality, but through the tears rise back up as a husk of their former selves. Becoming desperate, we head through one more tear in the hopes of getting the guns to the Vox, but this tear leads to a world where Booker is dead and has become a martyr for the Vox Populi, as we see the Vox in the process of their revolt. This universe's Fitzroy doesn't believe Booker is her Booker, and says his being here undermines her Booker's sacrifice and threatens to weaken the Vox's cause, and turns the Vox against us, which leads to Elizabeth being forced to kill Fitzroy. As Booker and Elizabeth get back to the airship, Songbird attacks again, crashing them back to the city. Booker and Elizabeth won't be able to leave Columbia without stopping the Songbird, so instead seek the instrument that can control it. This is where the founding of Columbia starts to become unraveled. After attempting to get inside of Comstock's house, Elizabeth is used to create a spectre of Lady Comstock, which we follow and learn quite a lot. Okay, so first off, Robert and Rosalind are in fact not twins, but the same person from two different realities. Comstock and Rosalind had actually taken Elizabeth from his alternate self in Robert's universe, and as such, make Elizabeth Comstock's adopted daughter. Comstock did this because he could not have a child and was artificially aged with the use of tears to obtain his prophecies and needed a future leader for the city. However, there was a little stick in Comstock and Rosalind's plan, that being Lady Comstock, who believes they had a child together and is furious. To stop the truth from getting out, Comstock plots the murder of the Lutesses and Lady Comstock in order to hide Elizabeth's origins, and used it as a way to blame Daisy Fitzroy for the murder of Lady Comstock. Comstock, though, didn't manage to kill Rosalind and Robert, as he inadvertently spread them throughout the multiverse, giving them the same powers as Elizabeth, and is the reason they appear and disappear throughout the story. Back to Booker and Elizabeth though. Once we find a way inside Comstock's house, the songbird finds them, and in a plea to save Booker, Elizabeth allows the songbird to capture her. But as Booker tries to follow them, ends up being transported into the year 1984 by an elderly Elizabeth. This older Elizabeth warns Booker that with the songbird around, he won't be able to save her, and reveals the devastation of what that means to the surface world in the future. To prevent this, she hands Booker information on controlling the songbird, in hopes that he will be able to save her younger self and spare her the years of torture and brainwashing in this future. Booker returns to 1912 and rescues Elizabeth as we finally meet Comstock face to face. Comstock demands Booker explain Elizabeth's past to her, as he apparently knows why she is missing a finger, but he doesn't remember, and in a rage kills Comstock. Booker decides to destroy the Siphon, a device that suppresses Elizabeth's abilities so she can access her full power and learn the truth. We gain control of the songbird and order him to destroy the Siphon, but the device that controls him also becomes destroyed. And as Songbird goes into attack, Elizabeth opens a tear, transporting all of them to the city of Rapture, but only Elizabeth and Booker are within the city walls, and Songbird dies from the immense pressure of the ocean. Elizabeth takes Booker to this reality surface lighthouse and travel through the building's door to a place outside space and time, where there are countless numbers of lighthouses, all containing alternate versions of them. Elizabeth explains they are within one of an infinite number of possible realities, both similar and drastically different due to choices that have been made within that reality. Elizabeth shows Booker the truth in 1893, the setting for all the game's flashbacks, and it is here all is revealed. Robert Lutece approached Booker on behalf of Comstock, requesting that he give us the girl and wipe away the debt, which actually referred to Booker's infant daughter, Anna DeWitt, which is why he branded himself with the mark AD, because he reluctantly agrees to sell Anna to clear his gambling debts, only to shortly change his mind, arriving too late to stop Comstock from escaping through the tear and closing on Anna's finger, leading to Comstock raising Anna as Elizabeth and revealing that Elizabeth, or Anna, is Booker's daughter. The reason Elizabeth can create tears is because she exists in two realities at once, with her finger and the rest of her in separate realities. Robert, however, is the reason Booker began this mission of finding Elizabeth, feeling guilt for his actions, and with Rosalind's help, bring Booker to Columbia in Rosalind's reality to rescue Elizabeth. Now, whilst Booker had killed Comstock in one reality, he is not gone from all universes, and to stop this cycle and prevent Comstock from being created in the first place, Elizabeth transports Booker to the place where he went to be baptized and cleansed of his sins after the Battle of Wounded Knee. Booker avoided this baptism in Robert's reality and went on to have Anna, but in Rosalind's reality, Booker went through with the baptism, found religion, and became Comstock. To stop this cycle, Booker agrees to let the alternate versions of Elizabeth drown him and stop Comstock once and for all, allowing him to never exist as the alternate versions of Elizabeth fade away one by one. But the screen cuts to black before the original one does, and in the post-credits scene, A. Booker awakens back in 1893, hearing a baby in the next room, and calls out for Anna before opening the door to her room, and again cutting to black. That's the story for Bioshock Infinite, at least from the way I interpreted it. Now, the end of the story really does dump a lot of information on you, so much so that it can almost feel overwhelming and hard to process initially. But in fairness, it is mainly in regards to the game's multiverse that can feel hard to follow. In regards to Elizabeth being Booker's daughter and Booker being Comstock in another reality, the game set it all up very well, and can be theories you have that are confirmed earlier than the big reveal. But let's back off the ending and talk about the rest of the game's story, because it has a lot of positives, but also some personal complaints. In terms of positives, where do I begin? Booker is a great character to experience the story through his eyes, as we learn more about his life prior to the game's events, and before we reach Elizabeth, we do get to see and experience the world of Columbia, which in the beginning is still a fully functioning city, unlike what we experience in Rapture. However, whilst clearly Booker is integral to the plot and overall mission of escaping Columbia, and Troy Baker does a great job at voicing him, really the story here follows Elizabeth. As much as Columbia is new to Booker, not only is it equally new to Elizabeth, but the world itself is a foreign concept. Not only does the story follow Elizabeth's experiences and joys of being free, finally interacting with the world, finding joys in the simple things like dancing or roaming around an arcade, and as the story progresses, not only does Booker and subsequently us the player learn more about Elizabeth, but she also learns this same information. Because of this, we see the evolution in Elizabeth's perception of the world she thought she knew adjust into the world we are actually in. And this moment is truly evident and realized when Elizabeth is forced to take the life of Daisy Fitzroy. Before this, while she was disturbed by the results of altering this reality and seeing the results, taking the life of Fitzroy really forces her to come to grips with not only having no great cause for the city, but the world she had read about and seen through her tears is much darker than she was led to believe. Courtney Draper did a great job at portraying the character of Elizabeth, and the chemistry between her and Troy was believable. A mainstay in the Bioshock series storytelling is through audio, and whilst these are still a form of storytelling here in Infinite, having some great nuggets of information to primarily supporting characters or antagonists, a lot of information about the world or story we are experiencing is done in-game through Booker and Elizabeth. This change really helps the story feel continual, like something is happening throughout compared to Bioshock 1 and 2, where you have a main task at hand, and really for most of the game, the extra story and development of characters is through the diaries until the story picks up towards the end. I'm not knocking this form of storytelling, because I loved it in those games. If you've seen my videos, you'll know that. But here in Infinite, it makes the overarching story of trying to flee Columbia feel like something is always occurring, or more about this world is ready to be learned and revealed. The world of Columbia is a character in itself, much like Rapture, but this time we experience the city's fall into chaos. We see how the city was intended to function as people lived their lives. We caused the city to plummet into chaos, and seeing this change was really an appreciated change of pace. It's clear a lot of Infinite is almost polar opposites to Rapture, from the main villains to the city's location, but the location of Columbia is just as rich and interesting as Rapture. I was especially fascinated by the American theme of the city, showing presidents as godlike people, the city worshipping Washington and poo-pooing Lincoln, whereas the Vox are opposing and worship Lincoln, and for the time period it all makes sense. Look, obviously I'm not an American, so there is probably a lot of details I personally missed in this setting, but I know enough to appreciate the ideas. Where I have an issue with the story is namely with two characters, the Songbird and Daisy Fitzroy. Right off the bat, I'm going to acknowledge these two characters' stories were probably a result of some cut content, and I do know both of these characters do get expanded on in the game's DLC to somewhat fix this issue, but in terms of the main game, they are a letdown. First off, Songbird is such a big threat, or at least appears to be, yet we don't encounter him all that often, and it doesn't even lead to a boss fight at the end. He just appears to halt the player from leaving, and really doesn't do much else. We don't learn what he is or why he watches over Elizabeth, and he just ends up being a bit of a letdown. Daisy Fitzroy, on the other hand, feels rather rushed. She gets more build up and character development through the Voxophone entries, but she is used in the actual story rather poorly due to the overlapping multiverses, turning her into a villain too quickly and being killed off shortly after. She had so much potential, as we learned she was used as a scapegoat for Comstock murdering his wife, yet she just isn't developed or in the story enough to really care that she ended up dying. Really, that's it though in terms of complaints with the game's story. In terms of plot holes, there was no glaring issues that I could see, which is quite a feat considering the game's subject matter. What Bioshock Infinite's story does really well is develop intrigue in the world of Columbia with a great setting and backstories to be told, build a connection between Booker and Elizabeth, and continually add and expand upon the story to a point where the plot twists are hard to see coming until they arrive. I was hooked in from start to finish from the story alone. There is no lull in the story to speak of, but we are talking about a game here. So how does Bioshock Infinite's gameplay hold up today? Bioshock Infinite's gameplay seems to be where the complaints for the game are focused, but I'll be honest, I think Bioshock Infinite is an absolute blast to play, but I do understand the complaints. Bioshock Infinite does make some changes to the Bioshock formula in a shift more towards the first-person shooting rather than the previous entries' blend between FPS and RPG elements, but overall is quite similar in terms of the series' mainstay mechanics. The gunplay really does feel like the main aspect of Bioshock Infinite's gameplay, which makes sense in regards to Booker's character as he is an ex-soldier. Let me get this out of the way. Yes, I would have preferred a full arsenal in comparison to the 2-weapon limit, purely because with this method it does mean a lot of the time one of your 2 weapons will be an explosive weapon of some sort to handle the Patriots and Handymen. So really you only get to choose one gun. And this is a shame because there is some weapons that very quickly lose all of their value in terms of you picking them up. To counteract this though, on hard, whilst not overly difficult, does involve you running out of ammo more often. So if you do want to survive an encounter, you will need to be more desperate with your weapon choices. This desperation at times does mean you need to prepare for a bad situation in advance, making sure you are stocked up with ammo, upgrading every weapon at least once on the off chance you'll need to use it, and that feeling does make the negative of not having a full arsenal and somewhat turns it into a positive. Whilst on the weapons, they feel like they pack a real punch, from a headshot blowing off an enemy's head or blowing away an enemy, and the weapons feel responsive and great to use. But it wouldn't be a Bioshock without some sort of superpower like abilities, and much like plasmids, whilst Vigors have a good amount of variety, like the Electrobolt in the previous games, you will stick to just 1 or 2 Vigors throughout, and here it's Bucking Bronco. It's just too useful to launch enemies into the air and pick them off one by one. But at least the Vigors look badass, even if story-wise they don't really get an explanation as to why they exist in this world. Now, a big thing for my personal enjoyment of the gameplay here in Infinite does rely on the game's difficulty. Even on hard, the game is quite easy, but on normal and below, it's just a joke, especially if you play the game through the Bioshock collection or have the season pass, because this is what the beginning of the game looks like. All of this DLC gives you upgrades for health, shields or salts, tons of money and clothing items which replace the tonics of the original games, and these items will last you for the most part until the end of the game, and you get all of this basically in the beginning. It makes the game a bit too easy on top of a game that is relatively easy to begin with. The game's enemy variety is where the game does improve for the most part over the previous entries, as we have similar variations in the standard enemies on top of Patriots, fire-wielding enemies, crow people, and handymen, and once the game starts throwing all of these enemy types at you at once, it really does make you go into that desperation mode I was talking about earlier, which makes the game feel more challenging, and for me, that makes it more fun. The enemies aren't flawless though. The crow people are a little too easy and don't even throw crows at you, so they just become a bit of a pushover, especially with bucking Bronco. But the handymen are the biggest letdown. The closest comparison to a Big Daddy in Infinite are the handymen, which had a ton of potential in terms of story.
Samuel always thought that the pew on Sunday went hand in hand with the desk on Monday. Science is the slow revelation of God's blueprint. After 2 years in the Lamb's Tower on Monument Island, he took ill with cancer of the stomach. I prayed to the prophet, and the prophet delivered unto us a miracle through his servant Fink. I do not know if I will ever get used to a husband bound in a skeleton of metal, but better a handyman than a dead one.
But from a gameplay perspective, they are just too few. I think you fight them a total of twice, maybe 3 times. And whilst they introduce a true threat to gameplay, especially in regards to halting your usage of sky rails and constantly being in your face with little Vigors can do to help, again, we just don't see them enough. But Bioshock Infinite's gameplay isn't all combat, and often will have breaks of just experiencing the world alongside Elizabeth. Going for side missions to unlock secret goodies, in the beginning seeing Elizabeth experience the outside world for the first time, and getting to see the world from a new perspective. Learning about Columbia's backstory through Voxophone entries or the environment itself, even when you are transported into the future, it really isn't a combat stage and more stealth based, because the enemies that catch a glimpse of you call in the loonies who are tough to kill, ignoring the fact that they have massive trumpet ears yet are deaf and use sight to catch you. Someone forgot to redesign this character. All of these breaks in the combat make you really invest in the story of Bioshock Infinite and build that connection with Elizabeth, which is why I think I enjoyed the story so much here. Like the previous entries, the game's downtime was where I truly became invested in the world of Columbia and wanted to learn more and more. Again, I couldn't get enough. Look, Bioshock Infinite's gameplay can be hit and miss. It's not perfect, but what I will say is I thoroughly enjoyed my time playing through it. No, it's not the most challenging game. There are definitely some missed opportunities from weapons to enemies, but when it was all said and done, I really did look back on my time with the game and just think, that was a blast. And really, what more can I ask for? Bioshock Infinite may not be the game it had the potential of being. All of the game's cut content from the development could have only improved the game as a whole, but the game we ended up getting was thoroughly engaging, intriguing, and a great time. The story is constantly giving you more information to try and put this puzzle together to form the greater picture. The gameplay does fiddle with the formula of this series, but for the most part, it works. A statement I see a lot with Infinite is, it isn't a Bioshock game. It strays too far from what made those games great. And my response to that is, what makes a game Bioshock? And I'm actually asking because I don't know what I would consider to make a game Bioshock or not. And I want to know your thoughts on that question. Is Bioshock Infinite a good Bioshock game? I think so. But what I can say with full confidence is, I had a great time replaying through Bioshock Infinite. And yes, in my opinion, 7 years later, it still very much holds up today.